All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. This event here is sponsored by MeWell, which is short for the mental well-being community. We're really happy to host this event with a really cool person, Diego, who Jonas will introduce in a second. A really quick word about MeWell is a community trying to fight mental health stigma, particularly within academia. And so we do so by hosting events like this. We host awareness events and social events to try to engage community and have people understand a bit more about mental health, how to improve mental health, and how to recognize stresses and whatnot. So again, without any further ado, Jonas, would you like to introduce our speaker here today?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the introduction. I myself, as mentioned, am Jonas Pasweg. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here with us. So today we are joined by Diego Hangartner, who dedicated over 30 years to scientific research and meditative exploration. He studied pharmacology at the Adhd Zurich, specializing in psychopharmacology and addiction, and later studied the Tibetan language at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics in India. Most impressive for me is therefore the range of people he met and projects he concluded to further his progress and his experience. From completing silent retreats to organizing large events with the Dalai Lama, to certifying in various methods of coaching and much more. We as MeWell are therefore very grateful to have such a great speaker here with us to hold a talk on mental balance and how to create it. This is especially fitting since even in his professional life, he seems to have a great balance between learning and teaching. Please welcome Diego Hangartner.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonas, for reaching out to me and for inviting me to this great opportunity. And also thank you to Eric Burns for hosting us today. And yeah, I thought I will be presenting a little bit about who am I, because it's very much related to my passion. And so today, just a quick question, what do you see right now? Do you just see mental balance and how to create it, the first slide, is that correct?
Unfortunately, it looks like we're seeing the presentation screen.
So. The whole presentation, okay.
We're seeing
all the other slides too. Okay,
correct, yes.
So I'm gonna change this thing here and show, and I'm just gonna go into this one because I don't need you to see all my material. So let me see here. Here we go. Okay, so now you should just be seeing one slide. Is that correct? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Eric, for helping me in the background. I have a question to all of you before I just jump into is, why are you here? Why is it that you sign up for on a Saturday afternoon for something that could be rather, what? You don't even know. So obviously there is somehow in you a wish to find something that helps you with maybe mental balance. And so that in itself is an indication that we are somehow not quite balanced. And I think that's true for all of us, that there is in us a wish to find something that helps us to be more happy and more well. On the other side, what is the most fascinating phenomenon for you? For me, the most fascinating phenomenon is that we are conscious, that we actually have a possibility to have access into our conscious processing and into our experience. And so today I'll be speaking about these two dimensions of how to create well-being, as well as the opportunity and the possibility to look into our mental process. And in order to do that, I thought I'm going to present quickly a little bit about what are we going to be doing? So we're going to start with about a 45 minutes presentation, or maybe it's 40 minutes, or maybe even shorter. But then afterwards, I'd like to open up for Q&A in order to sort of address open questions that have been lingering or have been triggered by my presentation. And so obviously this whole question about that, the fact that we're conscious, that we have a mind, is not something that I have invented. In my case, it has been around since I'm 12 years old, because I remember how I somehow suddenly became aware that I am aware. And that was kind of like a breakthrough moment when I was 12 years old. I remember it very clearly because when we were 30, when I was 13, we moved the building in which it happened, the home. And so other people have been actually already thinking about that. And Socrates, who in our culture is sort of a founding stone of our philosophical underpinnings, he already said that. He said that the mind is everything. But that's not all he said. He said something which is even more poignant, is what you think, you become. So that was very inside, kind of triggered my curiosity. Well, what do you mean by what you think you become? Another person that has been sort of an intellectual inspiration, oh, no, that's not here yet. Have been other people, like obviously Einstein, who has a very profound thinking. And so for me, the question was, how do I explore what is the mind? And in my case, I was very much tempted to explore physics or medicine, particularly psychiatry, but I was kind of like a little bit doubtful that this will really give me insight into what is the mind and how does the mind actually operate, because in the psychiatric context, it's mostly about dysfunctional minds. And so I then decided to study at the Adhd pharmacology. And because there were these interesting, fascinating substances that are so-called mind-altering substances. So I thought this is a great opportunity to really explore what are these substances, yes, but particularly what is the mind. Unfortunately, during my whole studies, all these years, we didn't even mention once consciousness, save alone healthy consciousness. We were mostly focusing on these functionalities, and DSM, the diagnostic manual, is big and fat with lots of these functionalities. And I found that very disappointing, because when we look at mental states, obviously we are very familiar with mental states of being unhappy, of being stressed, particularly in the context of the COVID situation right now. We are super frustrated, we're suffering, we're maybe even angry, and we have states where we're really craving something very strongly, and we're fearful, we're anxious, we're even depressed. And basically what we're talking here is that we have a mindset or a mind, a mental state that is negative, unwholesome. Now, pharmacology really helps you to bring, let's say, a mental dysfunctionality of a -8, whatever the scale you need, take, maybe up to a -4, but it doesn't really help you with something that we're all wanting. And what these substances mostly do, they remove a little bit that experience of this negative, unwholesome, and it leads you into what I would call more of a neutral state. So the absence of unhappy, stressed, frustrated, and angry minds is basically neutral. But there is something else that is present in us, and this is what drives us every day. Nobody of us gets up in the morning and says, today I want to have a really shitty day. We don't do that. What is it that really drives us? So there's obviously a deep wish, and this was also why I asked the first question, on creating something else, this positive, wholesome mental states in which the mind or your experience is one of being happy, joyful, open, flourishing, even thriving, or compassionate, courageous, benevolent, balanced, and resilient and strong. Unfortunately, up to about 20 years ago, this was a no-go, that you could actually start thinking in these terms, until positive psychology emerged. And so in my case, I was, this was in the 80s when I was studying at the Adhd. So after, and this was the time when also, when I finished my study, I had a pharmacy at the Langstrasse, and I was really immersed totally into the Blattspitz, where the Blattspitz at that time was called the needle park. And so I had the whole dysfunctionality of illegal drugs basically in front of my pharmacy, but within the pharmacy, I was experiencing the people that were legally taking drugs, antidepressants, and it clearly showed me that we're actually on a wrong understanding, and we were actually calling these substances, for instance, mind-altering substances, when fundamentally they're not really altering the mind, because fundamentally the mind, even for a person who is under the influence of an antidepressant or of a sleeping tablet or anxiolyticus, what is it that they want? They want to be free of the suffering and have these positive, wholesome qualities of the mind. So for me, these substances are not mind-altering substances in the fundamental way. They are actually perception-altering substances. And yes, they may relieve you a little bit and bring you up maybe from a -8 to a -4 or a -2, but still there is something that we could maybe do about cultivating these positive and wholesome qualities of the mind. And so for me, it was clear I need to do something differently. And so I resigned from the pharmacy and the whole policy and issue around the needle park. And I signed up with an organization that is called Pharmaciens Sans Frontières, like Doctors Without Borders, but for pharmacists. And so I had the opportunity to either go into Mosul, where Saddam Hussein had just killed 25,000 people with nerve gas, the Kurds, and build an infrastructure there, or go to Nepal. And so I decided to go to Nepal and work with people who have tuberculosis, parasites, and lepra. And some of you might have heard of leprosy. It's still prevalent in poor areas, certainly in Asia. And maybe some of you have seen it. Others of you may have even smelled it. It's really a pungent, strong smell. And so I was working with these people. And something that really struck me is that these people were actually quite happy. And one of those beggars once called me down and said, "Hey, come, why are you coming here?" He spoke a little bit of English. And I said, "Well, I'm coming here to help you." And he looked at me like, "Am I coming from the moon or somewhere?" And he said, "Well, we don't need you. We are much more happy than you are." And he was right. They had such a sense of community, and they were laughing and they were joyful. Of course, they had their haggles too and arguments, but fundamentally, he was strong. And so here I was coming from the West and seeing these people that were actually rotting physically, but mentally they were very strong. And back in Switzerland, I was working with people who were physically healthy, but mentally rotting. So that opened up a big question, well, what's happening here? And so I then signed up for a Buddhist study. I had first to learn Tibetan, and then in Tibetan, I did the study. It was 11 years in India, 2 years in Nepal, and then 11 years I spent in India, studying methods and ways how to cultivate positive qualities of the mind. And if you look at the backdrop here, the yellow, this is at my university, the Buddhist Institute of Buddhist Dialectics. There is this yellow wall. And in this yellow wall, that's the residence of the Dalai Lama. And every 2 to 3 years, people from the sciences, Nobel Prize laureates and psychologists, as well as physicists, were actually coming and having these dialogues with the Dalai Lama. These were the mind and life dialogues. At the beginning, they were private, and then gradually they started opening up. And I had the privilege to join them first as a translator, interpreter, and preparing the audience of the Tibetan side. And then gradually also I became the chief operating officer of the Institute, where we were hosting these dialogues that were sort of aimed at looking at commonalities. And here I'm moderating the session with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and many other eminent people, as well as this is an event that we organized here in Switzerland in 2010 on the altruism and compassion in economic systems. And these proceedings have been formed into books. Some of you might know Daniel Goleman has been an active person in this dialogue, also John Kabat-Zinn, Richard Davidson. And so gradually I've become more and more involved in that. And so before we continue, I'd like to sort of explore quickly the word of science, because obviously it means, coming from Latin, knowledge, scientia. And science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations, and also is able to make maybe some predictions. And this is about the universe. But nothing is being said about how this knowledge is being gained. And obviously in our mostly westernized modern way, it is understood that through tools like microscope or telescope or any other tool, we are actually exploring the phenomena that are outside of us. That's science. Well, yes, it is certainly one aspect of science, but the other aspect of science is also looking inside. And for me, these two modalities are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they're actually complementary. And in a way, this is the image that represents it the best, where we have somebody that is an expert in looking inside and is being explored from outside about what is different in a person, that is an expert in guiding his or her mental processes. And so nowadays we can speak of a science of contemplation. But for me, contemplation is also a science. So therefore, they're not mutually exclusive. And when the Dalai Lama was having these dialogues in 2000, he asked the scientists basically saying, well, all these dialoguing is very interesting, but what can we do for society? Because if what we think is beneficial, for example, meditation or certain ethical behaviors, if they're really beneficial, then they should be beneficial not only for the Buddhists, but also for the rest of the world. However, if you from science can prove that something is not beneficial, then we Buddhists need to change. So that was the basis that unleashed a whole research agenda. And it started in '92 when we had these scientists coming with some hardware, and we're looking at those expert meditators that were high up in caves or in little huts. And they also came to, at that time, in my school. And if you look at this image, I think it's a very poignant image that shows the scientist. This is Francisco Varela with his blue EEG cap, 16 electrodes. And then in the background, you have some other people like Richard Davidson. And they are basically came to our school saying, this is how we explore compassion and the mind. And you see all the monks in my school basically laughing. And it's, why are they laughing? They're not laughing because Francisco looks so funny with his blue hat, but they're laughing because it does absolutely not make any sense to look for consciousness up here when it is actually here. And over the last few years, more and more evidence has emerged that, yes, the brain is embodied. The brain is actually not just floating in the skull, but it is actually just a processing device or feature that processes information that comes through the body, and therefore it can also influence the body. And with that, long-term practitioners that have had more than 10,000 hours were then invited into 10,000 hours of meditation as sort of like Olympic athletes, were invited into the lab. And this is one of the images. Maybe by now you know that profile. This is a 256 electrodes EEG. This is in medicine. And also fMRIs studies were applied to these long-term practitioners to first and foremost understand what is different in people that have trained their mind. And this is actually a research that we're doing at the EPFL in Lausanne and Geneva, at the Brain Research Center, about virtual reality as well as identification of self. And what is different with people who have trained and have a sort of kind of a quality of mental fitness that are able to basically guide their mental processes much better than not trained people. And so over the years, a lot of research, and I'm pointing to the 2000, year 2000, where at that time there were maybe 10 or 8 studies that were being published per year on the word mindfulness as well as meditation. And in the last 20 years, this has been a very fecund and very active field of research. You're not doing academic suicide by engaging now in this type of work. Before that, it was basically considered a no-go. And I just want to point out a few critical research papers that have been published since. And this is the long-term effect. Oh, sorry, what happened here? Apologies. So what was found out is that, and this is the first paper that really revolutionized the understanding, long-term meditation practice self-induce high amplitude gamma synchronicity during mental practice. Up to then, it was understood that high amplitude gamma synchronicity is only happening when the person is in sleep and is basically consolidating their mental processing during sleep, learning, and but here it was found for the first time that it's also possible to activate that consolidation and learning process during waking state. And this is the line where people of long-term experience of practice are in a resting state, and then at one point they're activating those electrodes that are in high gamma frequency. Gamma frequency is from 25 to 40 hertz. So it's very, very high frequency. And it could also be found that there is something rather different. It's like, take an example of a sports person. If you want to know how a sports person is able to jump 2 meters, I mean, for me, this is unfathomable. Obviously, training led the person, and also a certain skill set has led the person to have these qualities. So, of course, you're going to research with somebody like that if this is what you want to find out. How do you jump so high? And you're not going to start with me. And so here, practitioners have a different kind of activity than novice during sort of rest state, but also during meditation. And another paper that was a breakthrough, and it was published in 2010, was that meditation practices leads to a change in regional brain gray matter density. And these are the areas that have been identified that really shift density if you start practicing, obviously not just once, but if you do, for instance, now we know where to look first and foremost, and then it is measurable after 2 weeks of a half an hour of practice. This is 7 hours of practice. You can, and over an extended period of just 2 weeks, you can start seeing shifts in matter density in areas that are related to the insula, the temporal pole, superior temporal gyrus, and anterior cingulate. Why are these areas so important? Because they are related to emotional modulation. And so what we can say nowadays is that the ongoing conversation between scientists and contemplatives continues to shape and change the way how we think and understand both the brain and the mind, and particularly in view of how to cultivate those positive qualities that we so much wish. The problem is that we're mostly actually habitually cultivating the not so good qualities. And I'd like to sort of bring that into our focus of today's presentation. Now, the science obviously is clearly pointing that we could use this analogy of an iceberg. And this iceberg, what do we see? What we see on an iceberg is basically what's above the waterline. And that's the minority, maybe 10%, depending on, but most of the stuff is actually happening under the water surface. And so in this iceberg analogy, I'd like to point you that what we think really determines what we feel, but what we feel obviously also determines what we think. However, behaviors, what we see outside, what we see basically a person being moving or engaging, it's basically determined by what is under the waterline. And so behaviorism as a discipline within biology has been mostly looking at behaviors, but basically neglecting, or for a long time even avoiding, what's actually happening under the surface in view of thinking and feeling. And if we want to have certain results, it's quite useful to understand that results are determined by our behaviors. But we need to look beyond and certainly below the water surface. And so when we are thinking in terms of happiness, we need to challenge a little bit, maybe, an understanding that is prevalent in our society. And that has to do that happiness is a result of maybe physical well-being. And this is what I discovered with my leprosy beggars. Well, maybe that needs to be a little bit questioned and taken with a pinch of salt. So here I'd like to show you a research that has been done at Harvard by Killingsworth and Gilbert. And it was published as in Science as a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. What do we mean by that? And people were given an iPhone app, and they were pinged throughout the day on different occasions. And we were asked, what are you doing? Maybe just doing my homework or watching TV, or I'm at work, or I'm on a phone call, chatting with somebody. And then they would also ask, what are your thoughts? And what are your feelings? Do you feel well about that? Do you feel unhappy about that? And so this is what was plotted at the end. And obviously, 65 is sort of a number where degrees of happiness were plotted. And we can see that there's not much difference between, let's say, a 55 at the lower end and a 75, the sense of degree, safe, of course, making love. This is sort of plotted along these, the degree of well-being. How happy are you? However, the big revelation came when they started looking at mind wandering. Were people actually unpleasantly mind wandering, that they were constantly interrupted by their own thoughts, or distracted by what's happening on the side, or the memories that were popping up, or the hopes and expectations, and the wishes to be somewhere else? And so that obviously had a big impact on well-being, whereas when people were focused, were fully present, they were happier. And so what this finding basically in summary can say is that people are less happy when their minds are wandering. than when they are focused. And that is true for all activities, independent of is it enjoyable or unenjoyable. If your mind is completely focused, then even cleaning toilets can be a source of joy. If your mind is wandering, even the most pleasant thing, that you're thinking about something else while making love, is a problem. So mind wandering is actually the cause of unhappiness. And it's not the other way around, that unhappiness causes mind wandering. So here we have an incredible potential to interfere and change the process. And so what people think is a better predictor of their happiness than what they are doing. So observe much more your own thoughts than what you're actually doing, or somebody else's thoughts. If you can't do that, good luck. So the most powerful distractor is actually not the noise around us or people that are distracting us. It's actually the chatter of our own minds. And how can we control or guide that, or for lack of a better word, not be so caught by this inner dialogue? And so I'd like to bring quickly towards the end an exploration around 4 domains that are particularly problematic in today's environment of uncertainty, of confusion, and of high pressures. And so the neuroscientific findings, it's clear that our brains are changing all the time. This is called neuroplasticity, and it's not something that is done when you're 20. It goes up into high old age, even up to death, that the brains are changing. The problem is much more that they are changing most of the time unwillingly. And that has huge consequences. And the consequences are, in summary, basically 4. The first one is distractibility. And as I showed you with this research, 47% of the time we are not paying attention to what we are doing. We're just doing it, but we're not even aware of what's happening and how we're doing it. Reaching out to the phone, for instance, or walking to the tram station, or driving a car. We can do better than that. And that has a consequence also in ADHD in children. This is a paper that has been published in 2018, and this is one of the graphs that actually we have had a 50% increase in ADHD between 2000 and now, in 20 years. Another one is the loneliness. 76% of middle-aged Americans have moderate to high level of loneliness. In Europe, it really depends. And this isn't data coming from the US, but in Europe, it really depends on what kind of society you're looking at, where communal life is much more prevalent than individual life. It really depends on that. But this 76% of middle-aged Americans that have a moderate to high level of loneliness, it has an impact on your physical health, because it results also in a high rate of mortality. What's happening there? I'm sorry, I'm just... it's actually leading in a higher mortality than obesity. More people are dying of loneliness in the US, mortality, than obesity. Now, if we go into the next one, and this is published at the International Psychogeriatrics also in 2018, another set of consequences is this negative self-talk and depression. There's a strong correlation between this negative self-talk, I'm not good enough, I should be doing much better, I'm worthless, I look so ugly, and depression, nobody likes me. And so there is an increase between 2014 and 19 of 33% in 5 years. And the problem here is not for adults only, but in teens as well. So the Center for Disease Control published this data in 2018, and that leads also to an increased degree of suicide, particularly among the young. And this has doubled over the last 10 years. So we really have a problem here. And for young as well as particularly middle-aged generation and old generation, the loss of purpose, meaning. And if I ask a community nowadays of what is more important, good salary or more purpose and meaning in what you're doing, more than 50% of the people say more meaning and more purpose would be welcome. And so that leads to the insight that people in their 60s with low purpose have a twice as high likely chance to die within 5 years. This is a publication that just came out in 2019. And so this is a problem. If you lack purpose and meaning, and of course, we're doubly challenged nowadays of finding really our own purpose and meaning that is connected to a higher level of engagement. And so this is why we can actually propose now the 4 pillars of a healthy mind. And that has to do, these are the antidotes to those those 4 basically problems. Awareness. Awareness is one antidote to the loss of focus. So engaging in focus, as well as resisting distraction, is an antidote to the confusion that we're experiencing. And for that, we need meta-awareness. Basically, knowing what your mind is doing right now. And meta-awareness could be also defined as, or an example of lack of awareness is when you're reading a book and like 4 pages or maybe even 10 pages down the line, you've been reading, but you completely are oblivious to what you have been reading. That's a lapse of meta-awareness. So we need that quality of the mind that is able to guide and engage focus. And this is crucial for transformation as well as for mental well-being. Another one is connection. Obviously, what nurtures harmonious relationships? Most of the time we are in relationship, but many times they're basically irritating. But bringing up qualities like appreciation, kindness, compassion, a positive outlook, a mindset that is focusing on opportunities rather than threats. And the third level is insight. An insight, for instance, into the narrative that we have about ourselves is very helpful, because often we are caught and captured by our negative narratives. And we think that these negative narratives are a true description of who we really are. If we take these negative narratives as true description, that's the best way to go into depression. But if we recognize, wait, this is just an inner voice, it's a sabotaging voice, then we are able to overcome that. And a healthy mind is really changing the relationship to the narrative. And then obviously purpose is to connect all your activities to the overarching sense of your purpose. But for that, you obviously need to first understand and be aligned with what is your purpose. What is it that you really want to bring into this world? And so you're broadening your actions. And that's actually crucial for mental health. And a paper that was published also in the early 2000s is a finding that particularly for academics is key. Results and exams are not necessarily a result of your IQ. You need a little bit of IQ, but actually academic performance in adolescence is more influenced by self-discipline. Can we sort of put those distracting thoughts aside and focus on what is it that we need to be focusing on? And that's where contemplative practices really come in handy. And there's a lot of research around that, as I mentioned before, where we can really engage and develop that skill set of how to focus. And what we focus on is also very important. And so I like to suggest this healthy mind platter as one framework that will help us. And this is done by a friend of mine, Dan Siegel, that I've been collaborating also in context of the Mind Alive setting. And there are, like a healthy nutrition, we need to have a balanced diet. We need to have roughage, we need to have fibers, we need to have obviously enough fat, we need to have, but not too much, we need also to have sufficient proteins and carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, and all of that. But the question therefore comes, what do we need for our mind? What are healthy ingredients? And the first and foremost is sleep time. What do you think is more important? Sorry, what do you think is a healthy dose of sleep? Is it 7 hours? Is it 8 hours or 9 hours maybe? Actually, it doesn't really matter what quantity of sleep you do. Much more important is the quality of sleep. And the quality of sleep is highly influenced by digital interference. If we have this blue light just up to 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night, our sleep will be much more compromised than when we stop at 8 o'clock at night and say, finish until I go to sleep for the next 2 to 3 hours. That's what has been identified. 2 to 3 hours is a good time to sort of decondition yourself from this blue light that has an effect on our hypophysa. Sleep time. Another one is physical time. We need to do exercise. We need to do sports. We need to basically get those cobwebs of ours out of our system. And not too much, but certainly not too little. It's enough going out there in nature and get fresh air. And another time is obviously important ingredient is focus time. And of course, I could go on and on about each one of these, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to go quickly and also go quickly through that. Another important ingredient is connecting time. Do we connect with others or do we just exchange with others? Completely different. We're very good at exchanging information, but do we really connect with others? Are we really present with the other person? We are social animals. It's a key ingredient for our well-being. And then again, playtime. When have, particularly when you're above 30, 40, and 50, when I ask these questions, when have you really played silly or just played for the sake of playing, not for winning the last time? Many people say, I don't remember. It's really sad to think in these terms. And then also not just playtime, but downtime. Often we sit down and then we pull out our phone and are WhatsApping. But when was the last time that you sat on a bench and just looked at nature without any interference of anything? No WhatsApp, no Facebook, or no mobile interference. Downtime is crucial for mental well-being. And then the time also to go inside. And this has to do with a contemplative practice where you really go inside and explore. Meditation is really a process of familiarization with the workings of your own mind and the cultivation of positive qualities like, for example, focus. So, and another ingredient obviously is good nutrition, food, preferably on the plant-based. So with that, I close my short presentation around the idea of mental balance and how to create it.
Thank you so much, Diego. If you can, could you stop sharing the screen? and then we can move forward to questions and answers. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. I certainly did, and I guess while we're waiting for people to submit in some of their questions, I have actually my own question, and it's maybe a little bit cheeky, but you were talking about how it's important to have focus, right? It's important to have focus in order to be happy. And perhaps my mind was wandering a little bit, but I took a look at a couple of papers and also realized that there's a lot of research saying that mind wandering is potentially key to creativity. So is it potentially true that creative people and idea people are always unhappy? And then I guess separately, what can we do to have both creativity and happiness, if that's true?
Yes, very good question. Thank you very much, Eric. The key here is at will. It's mind wandering when you really want to associate freely. That's actually it's clear for creativity, we need to basically reconnect different ideas, or in neuroscience, we would say different brain areas to each other and start having them communicate at will. The problem is when it's interfering constantly, when we are not able to focus, when we are actually supposed to focus. If you read, and I was particularly fascinated by the biographies of people like Einstein and Heisenberg and Bohr, where they Pauli, who was also at the Adhd, I was particularly interested in how they actually built creativity. And one thing is that they spent a lot of time focused on the topic, and they were really exhausting themselves and all the opportunities, possibilities by really thinking thoroughly, and then let go. When they're walking on the beach, you may just aha. Or when they are waking up and they had an insight. It's really not about not mind wandering, but mind wandering at will, and being able to not mind wandering when it matters. And so this is where we are challenged, because we have constant interference. And it's not only and for me, the focus is not about being able to watch a 2-hour movie, but it's about being focused from within. And then also not only being able to focus from within to an external object, but to be able to focus on something within, like your own mental process. And if we're really able to do that, hold the attention on an internal process at will. And again, I have to say at will, because the problem with depression is that we are not at will anymore. We're going to this loop of rumination and again and again. And who has not woken up at night at 3 o'clock in the morning with, Jesus, I need to be sleeping now. And this is particularly true for professionals in leadership functions. Then you have a problem when you cannot let go. And so focus is not just being engaged with the object, but also to be able to let go. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, it certainly does. And thank you, by the way. We have a couple other questions that have come in. We have one question, which is actually it's a bit deep. I wouldn't be able to answer this question. I hope you can try your best. The question is, how can you get back a sense of meaning and purpose when it is lost or taken away?
Yes, thank you for that question. First and foremost, you need to understand what is it that you really want. And I think it pretty soon becomes clear, even if you feel that your meaning or your purpose has been taken away from you, I think there's still within you, even if you are at a loss, this wish to be free of confusion, of senselessness, and also have that kind of sense of frustration. And for me, the Buddhist articulation of dukkha, of the suffering, is a very helpful way to start looking at what is it that I really want? What is it that I really wish for? And it's clearly somehow around the idea of not being in that state of frustration. So obviously, the mental process that leads to this frustration is the same infrastructure that is actually also able to bring up something that might be different. And so here, what happens? And this really goes now into the neuroscience of threat and reward. On the one side, we have a threat. And of course, when we're in threat, we start basically bringing up all the reasons why something is not possible. And we use all these self-sabotaging dialogues, if you want to say, or these self-sabotaging storylines. And it becomes really difficult to see through. So the first and foremost thing that we could do is to become aware that this is what's actually happening. And even if it's just your own purpose is to be happy, to be well, to be in balance, to be joyful, that in itself is already the gift that is present, but it's unfortunately buried by all the other stuff that our mind and experience has created. And this is something that is really dear to my heart, because I was there too, that I was basically not seeing any, what's this all about? I mean, these junkies, they're just basically shooting themselves to death. What's this situation with our environment? So by turning this into an opportunity, we're actually moving away from the fixed mindset. And there's a whole range of research, particularly by Carol Dweck, that looks at the problems with our fixed mindset as opposed to the mindset that looks at opportunities and growth that we can learn, that we can explore. And so by taking this whole, I would call it an onion, and start peeling it, we start realizing where is it that's what we want to develop. And our well-being, and I'll end with this, our well-being depends very much on a skillful engagement with ourselves, but also with our environment and the people around us.
Thank you very much, Diego. Kind of a bit of a clarification question for the audience. Some people were asking about the pillars of a healthy mind. And I think just so that people can clarify, could you remind us what the 4 pillars of the healthy mind were?
Yes. So the 4 pillars of the healthy mind are, first and foremost, focus, awareness, the capacity to resist distraction, and also let go of distraction. And it's obvious that we can talk about it as much as we want, but we actually need to develop the mental muscle. And it's like if you're going into a fitness center and you just look at all these barrels and think, oh, wow, this is cool. This is really great. But you don't do anything about that. You actually need to engage yourself with those barrels and start really developing that muscle, so that we are build up this muscle. And if you want to build up your biceps, you're obviously not going to train your legs. You need to be quite specific about it. So there's many methodologies around that. So awareness and building focus, 2 different things though, but awareness is sort of the precondition, and then build focus, be able to develop the capacity to resist distraction is a sort of a subcategory. And then another subcategory of building awareness and focus is meta-awareness. And this is what you train actually in contemplative practices, if you get a good teacher that knows what he's talking about. And the problem nowadays is that these apps, they are all cognitively stimulating, but you can't ask the questions. So find a good teacher that really is able to build that focus. And this is crucial for transformation. That's the first one. The second one is connection. And really look at what nurtures harmonious interpersonal relationships. Of course, we're always looking at the outside, the perfect spouse. the good partner that looks cool or makes me happy. But actually, that's not really what I'm talking about here. Is really connecting also with yourself, like appreciation, kindness, compassion, and a positive outlook. That's the second one. The third one is insight. Understand this narrative that we have about ourselves and change the relationship to that narrative if it's more towards I'm not good enough, or I am just need to do better, and the other person is better than myself, or I should be better than the other one. And so this is another one. And a healthy mind really changes the relationship to this narrative. And the fourth one is purpose. And I think I have said enough about that for this short session. Of course, there's much more that we could explore.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that was a very thorough answer, and thank you for reminding us. I have four questions from audience in succession, so I guess bear with me. Hopefully, is it okay if we go over time a little bit?
Sure, if it's good for you and it's helpful, then of course.
I think from the attention that your presentation has received, I think certainly people are getting a lot of benefit out of it, and it seems that you're very helpful. So yeah, I would certainly encourage, as long as you're okay. So the first question is actually from Jonathan, and he's actually happy to ask in person.
Great, absolutely. Jonathan, hi.
Hi, Diogo. Thank you for your talk. The question I was having was the platter for a healthy mind you presented seems quite large for doing every day. And is the idea that you do these things every day, or what is the ideal time scale?
Well, you're eating every day, first thing. We're also basically sleeping every day. So 2 are taken care of. And another one is obviously that we are maybe connecting every day. But of course, it's all about the quality. That's why I was specific about it. When we talk about meditation, for instance, or contemplative practices that really cultivate positive qualities through a process of familiarization, then obviously it's better to do 5 minutes, but properly, than a half an hour and you're basically thinking about everything else. And so here, practice is really directed to the quality. And the same is for sport. You don't need to do sport every day, no. But if you do it twice or 3 times a week, that's already much better than none. And depending on what kind of downtime you do. For instance, what do you do when you go onto the public transport system? Most of the time, you just pick up your WhatsApp and you do your mobile phone and you engage with it. And then you just 10 minutes later, you're at your destination. Well, that's a great opportunity. You have your earphones on anyway. Nowadays, you have your mask. You don't need even to make nice faces. But this is a great opportunity to just sit. And I really mean just sit. And you will notice that the mind goes blah, 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 blah. You could be doing this and feeling that. And so that's exactly what I'm talking about. This inner dialogue that pushes you constantly is problematic when we're dealing with mental health. So it's not about doing it sequential and having all ticked off per day, but certainly be aware of it. This is why I bring it in the context of awareness. What do we focus on? Why do you all brush your teeth? I tell you, brushing your teeth is absolutely useless. 3 minutes. And it's also totally useless if you brush your teeth for 2 hours one day, and then for the rest of the month you say, oh, okay, I've brushed my teeth for 2 hours, so for the next 29 days, I don't need to do it. No, it's the ongoing 3 minutes daily maybe after breakfast and before going to bed, which makes the big difference. And that's the same with your Healthy Mind Platter. Find ways, and of course, this is a domain that I have invested a lot of time in exploring, and with good reason, because this is exactly where we are shortcoming. We have lots of shortcomings. We think we need to do this instead of that, when brushing your teeth is really useless to do it 2 hours at one go and forget the other 29 days. But every day a little bit, for instance, those 10 minutes in the tram, or twice because you're going to go back.
All right, thanks very much for the answer.
Welcome.
Yeah, we have another question that's I hope I can say it correctly. So someone has a question about the quote actually on the first slide that you have, going all the way back to the first slide, where you say a quote by Socrates saying, yes, the mind is everything, and what you think you become. And what this person was interested in is if this is somehow related to the law of attraction, which, clarifying, the law of attraction suggests that what we attract what we think. Here's wondering if both of these things are related.
I don't know if Socrates had an understanding of the law of attraction, and I have to confess that I am, besides electromagnetics, I'm not too familiar with all the ramifications of the law of attraction. But of course, in view of what you think, and this is now another quote that I can bring in, is in research around neuroscientific memory and attention research. It's clearly that you are actually only seeing what is at the purvey of your filter. So if you have a rose tinted glasses on, of course, that's what you're going to see. All the white is suddenly nice and pink. And when you have the flutter in your stomach because you're in love, everything looks so beautiful. And there is certainly truth in you seeing everything rose tinted, but you're not even aware that you're wearing these rose tinted glasses. So the key here is to remove those rose tinted glasses, and then you start seeing things differently. And so what we draw our attention to is what creates our reality. And this is a quote by Posner, one of the leading researchers around attention, is what attracts our attention. So if, and this is really key now, if you are constantly drawn by your thread response, then obviously that's what's your reality. But that doesn't need to be like that. And this is where I find this whole corona situation also very interesting, to the amount of fear that people are actually triggered by, because that's what you are basically having in the background. And on the other side is, this is a great opportunity to explore new concepts, new ways of thinking. This is a great opportunity to maybe familiarize yourself with yourself. So that's what you then draw onto and develop. But it's obviously a little bit more complicated, but I just wanted to sort of show that the reactive response mechanism is very attractive. And this needs to be, because biologically speaking, we only have survived in the caves when we saw everything as a snake, because more sticks lying around could be snakes. But this is not our world, but the brain still operates like that. And we have an extraordinary opportunity here to basically shift and see, yes, how our patterns work, but then also move and shift more towards creative mindset.
You bring up actually an interesting point. Actually, a couple of events ago, we had a talk about toxic masculinity, and this person also brought up the conversation about how our mind is inherited from an archaic human, and so some of how we behave and how we feel are just like your snake and stick analogy here is it comes from this time, and it's interesting having to resolve say this kind of archaic human with a modern day society. And kind of on a similar note, we have someone with also a very thorough question, asking, from my understanding, how to resolve the society that we live in with what we need to do to be happy. And the question in full is, often Eastern practices or philosophies, meditation included, are proposed to us Western people as a way to improve ourselves and be more successful. However, it seems that obsession with success is one of the causes of unhappiness. And how do we avoid falling into this trap where we work on our mental health with the goal of being more successful, and how society likes us to be happy, productive, and rich?
Right, very pertinent question. I think that we have completely skewed understanding of what is success. And this brings me actually back to one of the things that you just mentioned, Eric, is in view of, I do differentiate between brain states and brain operation, which obviously is a very dominant worldview, as if consciousness is a result of this bottom-up processing. But, and this is a key that has been confirmed repeatedly, there is also a top-down process. We actually not just results of our brain structures, but because of intention and motivation, we can actually shift brain structures. So there's a kind of like a mutual conditioning process. There's top-down as well as a bottom-up process. So just to sort of paraphrase that. Having said that, I think it's important to view our society of defining success. We can only be successful if we have, for instance, material goods. Again, big problem, because material setting is conditioning our well-being. That's the understanding. Now, my beggars, and I'm saying my beggars because these are the ones that I've been working, I would not advocate in no way to become a beggar in order to be happy. No. But what they taught me is that you can actually be extremely mentally strong, healthy, and well, even if that is not your primary focus. And I'm saying here primary focus, because that has become for us a sort of a condition. You're only good if you have a lot of money, for instance. And so, fortunately, I met tons of people. Of course, the Dalai Lama attracts a lot of very rich people also. And many of them are absolutely abject sad. They have a lot of wealth, but they're in constant state of either paranoia or distrust, or they're not really where you want to be because their identity depends very much on their wealth, but they're looking for something else. That's why they're coming to the Dalai Lama, in the hope that he will give them an answer for what to do and who to be. And so there is a problem with this sense of success. You're only when you have, let's say, cash in the bank. Of course, having cash in the bank is helpful, but it's not the cause. We confuse that. It's a condition. The cause for inner flourishing is your own mind. And so, yes, in Asia, and I have seen India, for instance, over the last 30 years that I have been living in there, change dramatically. And I wouldn't say for the good, because suddenly it became more and more the external factors are of importance. So you can actually be a very egocentric and even mean person, and you become therefore successful, but you become lonely because people start shunning you. They don't trust you. And that's actually the main problem. And so for me, successful is more of a way how you bear yourself. And if people really trust you, and if you want to know if somebody is really successful, look at what kind of people does he or she attract, and not what he or she has.
Okay, and I
does
guess
that help? Guess what? Sorry.
I hope it helps the person who asked the question, and I guess to best resolve, say, the differences between how our Western society functions per se, and the inner peace you need to develop is I guess an answer that you somewhat made is that it's, well, meditation and the possibility to separate material goods from your inner self and also your mental state, because these things can be separate. It's possible to actually be happier regardless of what setting you're in.
Yeah, happiness for me is not a final goal. It's a way of how you carry yourself. So there's often a misunderstanding that we need to do this in order to become. Therefore, a goal, happy or well or flourishing. And of course, there are many, certainly in the context of that Buddhist psychology, mental states that really lead to that inner centeredness, I would say. And it's not at the exclusion of others. It's not that because you're going to be up in the mountain and basically meditate for the next 30 years that you might be more happy. That could be a big trap. But it's really how you carry yourself and how open you are towards whatever reality is, and how do you carry yourself. And meditation is a very powerful tool, if you were to say, but meditation is also a way of carrying yourself. This is why the definition, how we use it, obviously also in the research, but it comes from the Buddhist context, is meditation is not about not thinking. That's often misunderstood. And it's not about just being dull and completely spaced out and finally this inner dialogue has stopped. No, it's how you guide it, how you cultivate intentionally. And so it's the intentional process of first familiarizing yourself with the workings of your own mind and the cultivation of positive qualities. And there are plenty.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that answer. And to follow on this, we do have a second to last question. I promise we won't.
I just have to go at past. I mean, I'm happy to keep going till then, but at past I have to have a hard cut.
To be fair, the last question is what we should do to follow with more resources, but we'll get there after this question. So Miguel, actually someone from the MeWell team, has a question, and we'll let him ask it for us.
Go.
Yes. So
hi, Miguel.
Hi, Diego. Thanks so much for the presentation and for your answers to the questions. They are really insightful. Yeah, my question is, it seems that many of the struggles that most of us have is to being able to really separate these stages that you present in this healthy mind platter. As you say, it's really important that these are really quality time, so that we may only need to spend 5 minutes really concentrated in, for instance, meditation instead of 30 minutes just kind of wandering around and not having this kind of quality. So I don't know if there is any recommendations to achieve this, or is it just kind of practice towards this? And then my second question related to this is, do you think, or do you know if this is mostly related to this latest, like the digital era of just being connected every time with mobile phones and everything? Is it something that has developed recently only, or?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I think it's a very important distinction that we need to do in view of, obviously, attention is one of the most precious goods for us. question much more is, how do we deploy it? What do we focus on? And so obviously Facebook and TikTok and what have you, they're all very cleverly engineered around the attention grasping. And there is a great documentary that sort of has just come up. It's called The Social Dilemma, where this is really addressed, that they are cleverly engineered using neuroscience as sort of an attention grasper. And I think nowadays, to make this whole thing quite short, is that we have an additional level of challenges, which is this electronic, social media, blah. Why do we engage in social media in the first place? It's because we want to be connected, but we actually misinterpret information exchange for real connection. And this is why I enjoy this platform that we have here, where we really can explore and think. And then, of course, next step is, how do we engage? And this is the first part of your question. It is helpful to know exactly what you're doing. And therefore, we need to have people that know better. And this was obviously my teachers. They knew better. And I was able to trust them and explore with them. And they were pointing again and again to what is actually the problem. And one of the problems is our own confusion. And so if we are stuck and start making decisions out of confusion, well, obviously, it's not going to work out very well. And then we can practice as much as we want, but we're not going to be able to sort of progress. And so the best possibility is to find experts. I mean, would you go to a dentist that has basically read a booklet for half an hour, and then he says, well, I know everything because I've done a 6 weeks course or 8 weeks course, and then I'm engaging with that and kind of trust your whole denture to it? I certainly would not. It's obviously somebody that is an expert. And the same thing is true for the practice. If you have somebody that you can trust, that knows what he or she is speaking about, then obviously you're going to progress much better, but you can also return back and ask the person, somehow here it's not working, but here it is working. So obviously, practice is very much contextual to your own shortcomings or confusions. And I'm saying shortcomings because obviously we're all fallible, and we're growing and we're learning new things. So in that sense, it is certainly advisable to find then the proper practice. And I can give generalizations here, but obviously for you, it's going to be different than for maybe Eric or for Jonathan or Jonas or whoever. But there is actually, and this is what really struck me, how my teachers were able to basically bring everything down to the core. And the core is basically 3 things. One is the sabotaging processes. The other one is the sage processes, the ones that really develop healthy qualities of the mind. And in the middle of that is the capacity to develop that muscle that is called or is around self-management or self-control or self-guidance. So with that, I need to rest my case.
Thank you.
And also thank you so much, Diego, for not only explaining for us, but giving such a nice presentation, answering all the questions. And we're really, really grateful for having someone as well-renowned as you to be speaking to us today. I guess kind of finally, if people have follow-up questions or want to reach out to you directly, you said earlier it's okay if we extend your email or contact via our registration?
Yes, Diego at diegohangartner.org. Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
I have a website. So if obviously some of you would like to participate in one of my retreats or workshops, or I mean, check out my website. I continuously, and I have also work relationships with other groups, and so there's plenty of possibilities to sort of not waste your time.
Yeah, and I would definitely encourage everyone to please check out Diego's resources. For reference, in the chat is also the site to the MeWell community. We can also help put you in contact with Diego, and also we're happy to continue having events, hopefully like this in the future. This was really helpful. Again, thank you so much, Diego. I'd like, if possible, for our audience to thank Diego. If you want to unmute yourself briefly to say thanks and bye, you can. Else can use emotions in the chat. And
thanks a lot, Diego. It was really nice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Be well, stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care of yourselves.
Then ciao.